Here we go. This is Steve. He's another EAP teacher. I'm going to be telling him about the topic that you guys have heard about already. So I don't know what you know exactly about like what finance is or what banks do, but at the beginning of our class we learn essentially what banks do. Finance, and banks are like a substitute for finance, is there are some people that have money that they're not using, right? And then there are some people who have projects or they have things, they need money, and banks are just a way to connect these two groups, right? They keep their money in the bank, then the bank gives it to other people who do stuff with it. And of course, the banks are a business, right? And they charge fees, right? They pay interest to these people to collect money, but then they charge interest here, and they keep the difference. That's how they make money. That's the simple version. But of course, the interesting thing is banks, in their, they're a business. They're trying to make money. Two things are important here. One, they're always trying to find like new ways that they can match these people, or new ways they can do this stuff. And at the same time, this is an important feature of society, right? People have money needs at different times in their lives and different kinds of groups. And as a result, governments care about this, and therefore there's rules, there's regulations. And I'm going to kind of give you an example of kind of a new way banks are doing this and how it relates to, those two things. And you can see here, we've already done something. One, you see we have boxes and we have arrows. One way of thinking about banking is
flow.
Let's make new boxes and new arrows to see what we can do. So I want to tell you about something called a swap. You know what swaps are? Financial swaps.
I'm familiar with the term, but
okay.
I
don't. What's the swapping? I don't actually know where the word swapping is. Kind of like instead of doing a normal trade, you change who has the things, but otherwise the trade is still the same. So one way to think about this is, say there's a client, like a hedge fund or some sort of client, and they want to have exposure to a stock. It's like they want to, if the stock goes up, they want to make money. But if the stock goes down, of course, they would lose money. But for some reason, they don't want to actually own the stock. And there's different reasons why they might want to do this. Maybe for tax reasons, or maybe for disclosure reasons. They don't want people necessarily to know that they're invested this much in some stock. Or it could be something simple like a currency reason. Say you were interested in a Korean company you thought was going to do well, but you didn't want to have to deal with the strength of the Korean won to the US dollar. You're an American company. So you could do a swap where how it would work is, say you want, pick a number, $100 million worth of economic exposure to some stock. You would go to a bank. So here's the client. I don't know what we're going to draw for the client. And they go to the bank and they say, hey, we want $100 million worth of stock X, but of course we don't want to buy it. Bank says, hey, no problem, we can help you out here. Banks, they have money, they have access to stuff. So the bank goes out and it finds like an institutional fund or somewhere where it can get money, and it borrows $100 million and takes $100 million. And of course it pays some amount of interest, say 3%, to borrow this money, and then it charges them 4%, right? And that's how they make their fee. But if the price, and they use this, and then they buy a stock. They buy the stock, and if the stock goes up, they pay them the money. If the stock goes down, well, of course, the money's actually going to have to go this way. They're going to owe money to the bank. But the bank doesn't care at all about the stock. They have the stock rate. So, one question you can ask is, why are they paying the bank for this? I am recording. Okay. Why did they pay the bank for this? And the reason is, well, one, banks, they went out and got $100 million worth of stock. I can't do that, but banks can do that. The other one is, if something happens to this company, the bank's on the hook for it, right? They have credit risk to whoever this company is. But that's how it works. Now, this seems to work for everybody. The problem is for the banks, like we talked about regulation, right? Banks are regulated. And one of the regulations is, of all the stuff they have, all the loans and all the investments and all the things they have, they need to have capital to keep that. They have a capital requirement. It's some percent of all their stuff. And when they borrow this $100 million and they buy the stock, they've added $100 million worth of a liability and an asset that they now have to have capital to pay for. And that capital requirement might actually eat all of this profit. So banks figured out another swap that they can do to get rid of this. And this is, now they go to the same client, say, and they say, hey, instead of you loaning us $100 million and we paying you interest on it, why don't you just buy $100 million worth of the stock? and we will pay you 3.2% interest on that, a little bit higher, right? And you have the stock, and if the stock makes money, you give it to us, and we give it back to the client. If the stock loses money, we'll pay you the difference, right? And for them, they have essentially the same agreement with the bank. They're actually making a little bit more money, but their risk is just, is the bank going to pay them or not, which is the same when they loaned them $100 million. So they do this, and then they can go here. They can do the exact same thing here. But they've saved $100 million off their books, right? It doesn't count. They don't need to have capital for that, right? So they win. They get the same deal. And of course, the bank gets, they make more money because they don't need this capital requirement. So again, here's new boxes, new arrows. Banks have created a thing that gets around this thing. And you can ask, well, who's paying for this? Like, where have we lost? And maybe the only thing that you can say is maybe the financial system is not as safe because they no longer are keeping the capital for this deal that they're doing. Is that really a risk? Well, I don't know. But this is how different boxes and different arrows get drawn. I was going to say something. Oh, and it also kind of demonstrates this. Whenever you make a rule and you have, a party who's trying to make money, they're going to start looking for ways to get around that rule. That's just the nature of the business. And this shows, I think, a lot of things about, one, how finance works and how regulation works and what this can look like.
Cool.